Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next installment of the perspectives from the hemp industry. And today we have two guests, David Raab from Roseville Farms and Brian Pearson from IFAS Mid-Florida Research and Education Center. And just to jump right in, David, would you introduce yourself? Who are you and where are you from?
Yes, good morning. I am David Raab, and I founded a company called Roseville Farms in Apopka 27 years ago. And we evolved into a singular crop grower. We grow a perennial vine called clematis, and we've dedicated all of our space, which is a lot, to growing clematis. Ended up being the largest clematis producer in the world. We supply 75 to 80% of the United States consumption of clematis every year. And recently we had the opportunity to get together with Brian and a couple other people from the MRAC, the Research Center in Apopka, which I've been involved with for the last 20 years. And so reaching out to them is nothing new, to discuss the possibilities of the hemp pilot program and any involvement that I might have. And what ended up happening was a good partnership between Roseville Farms, IFAS, University of Florida, and we really partnered in this pilot program, not just to do little tests, but to actually take over the role of testing and approving varieties for the state of Florida, since the rules called for having only varieties pilot program approved for sale. And so that's where we got in, and that starts the whole discussion of what happened after we decided to go forward, and where we are today. And I can keep going.
I think we'll get to the, there's plenty of time to get into the details. But first, I'd like to give Brian a chance to introduce himself.
Sure.
Certainly. Thanks, Zach. Brian Pearson, assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Horticulture, and I've been located at the Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka, amazingly now for 17 years. I've also had the good fortune of growing up down the street from Roseville Farms, and so David and I go way back. And as David articulated, he's been an asset to IFAS and has worked closely with IFAS for many years, and our research center in particular. And so I was very happy and excited when he called and had interest in the hemp pilot program. And so in my role at the center over the years, I've been focusing on medicinal and specialty crop production. So what my program is trying to understand is, when we are looking at identifying new specialty crops for the state, it is that 101 component. What do we need to know about those plants, from cultivar selection to nutrient water management to pest management? And this is where relationships such as the one that exists between Roseville Farms and the University of Florida IFAS is awesome, because here we have an amazing partner in town, so we can try to understand these things at the research center to assist and help when possible the industry when they have problems. And so having that communication and close connection has been a win-win, I'd like to believe, for both the industry and for the university.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Growing up professionally, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So, all right, Dave, back to your turn. So tell us a little bit more about your hemp business.
Okay, well, I'll just relate a little bit back to Brian and MRAC. When we met, they had already received donations of hemp from various places that were starting to grow, and there was really no direction other than getting used to growing the plants and understanding what they needed and what kind of facilities at the center were the best facilities to grow it in, both indoor and outdoor. So it was, I think when I got involved, we were able to really add a focus, which was providing a facility that would allow the exact same conditions 12 months of the year, so that we could run varieties submitted by breeders from around the country, around the world. There are varieties that are coming into the United States. There's a number of active European countries that are breeding. And at any rate, we wanted to test these varieties to make sure that they fit into the Florida growing schedule, and to prove that they would go to flower and that the flower would be tested and it would test lower than the federal and state standards for hemp. And that, of course, is the big thing. Whether or not the varieties provide other CBDs and terpenes that the breeder is looking for, we don't test for that. We just make sure that the plant grows well, that it is uniform, because we grow multiple individuals. And we start with a cutting and grow them out so that we have a full perspective on the plant. So what we started doing was receiving cuttings from growers and breeders who wanted their varieties approved to be sold in the state of Florida. And at the end of it, I think we approved 32 varieties. I think we received 33, 32 passed the test. And so it was pretty good. And that's because people didn't want to go through the process. And it did take over 3 months once we got the plant to finalize the test. So it was important for us to start with cuttings from people who knew their plant, people who'd already grown it out, flowered it, tested it. They know that this is a good plant that will pass. Now, the University of Florida's pilot program has to agree with that and then submit it for availability for sales in the state. So what that was, we got cuttings. We spent 3 weeks rooting the cuttings. Then we would transplant them into a next size, which is a 4-inch pot. And we would grow it for a number of weeks in the 4-inch pot. Then it would get transplanted again into a 10-inch size, which would be the finished flowering size pot. And we would take maybe 20 individuals that we had rooted and we would put them into the flower room. And then we would run them for another 8 weeks. And then based on the local rules, we needed to test at an appropriate time prior to harvest so that we could get the results to prove that they remained at less than 0.3%. And so that whole process, I guess, took 16 weeks, I think, from the time that we got the cuttings to the time that we actually got the test back. And ultimately, that was the big chore, because that's propagating and transplanting up and keeping a plant until it flowers is sometimes not as easy as it sounds. And when you're dealing with so many foreign cultivars, you know, even though they're all hemp and they're all cannabis, they're individuals, and some propagate better than others, some grow once they're rooted better than others. And all of that comes to light when you run a program like ours and you start with cuttings. You get to see it all. And so there was definitely a learning curve. The first couple of rounds of cuttings that we got didn't end up as successful as we wanted. We had to go back to the trough and ask them for more material. But after, I think, the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we figured it out and had no problem for there. But I always say that my plants don't read the textbooks. The plants I grow, they don't read the textbook. And whoever wrote the textbook didn't write it based on growing something at my place, in my facilities.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what it is. You have to learn how to grow something in the facilities that you've chosen to grow them in. And it's very unlikely that they're going to be similar at all to the places that plants were grown and written about in the textbook. So it was a big learning curve, especially with the different varieties. And some of these varieties are very tall, some of them are squat. And we were able to identify a lot of factors about all of these varieties. So anybody who's interested in growing any of those varieties that are on the list in Florida, we do have information that we can provide, at least a little bit of experience.
Very
And
cool.
so that's one of the things. And also one of the things that we did was we wanted to learn how to scale up a hemp growing greenhouse operation. So where the rest of the pilot program was working on field grown, and for the most part, plants from seed. I don't know, Brian, you can step in. I was seed and cuttings, but ours, of course, were all vegetatively propagated. We ran a program that I think we had 56,000 plants. We had eight rounds of 7,000 plants, and we were attempting to run a circuit where we would harvest every week, and the flowering period being an 8-week cycle. And we were successful with it in the sense that we were able to do it, but the overall quality of the product, because we were pushing it through fast, didn't meet the A+ grade standard. So another lesson learned, that depending on who your customer is, you have to decide what it is. Well, you have to know what it is that they're looking for. Is it size? Is it smell? Is it both? I mean, is it CBD content for extraction? Is it terpene content for extraction? And so it took us a long time to learn all the different things that we could get from a hemp flower and all the different uses for it. I think for us, the most enlightening thing was that we were able to identify a niche, an area in the hemp market that we could focus on and be successful. So advice to anybody getting into the hemp industry is understand how broad the industry is and pick a place that you want to operate in, because it's too, when you say I'm a hemp grower, it's very broad. Are you a fiber grower in the field? Are you a grower of flower for CBD extraction? Are you growing small lots for smokable hemp? Are you searching out and getting the newest genetics from the best breeders and growing that, because those varieties always have their own niche market as well? And so you have to identify what it is that you're going to do, and then you have to figure out who that customer is and make contact with that customer and make sure that customer actually wants what you're thinking about growing. And I think that's where a lot of people made a mistake, is they thought, well, I'm going to go into growing hemp, and when I have the hemp, there's going to be a market there and people to buy it. And we found that, obviously that's not the case, that being a good grower is one thing, but understanding the market and understanding your customer base is something that I think most people who got into hemp at the first place didn't inquire enough and didn't get to know well enough so that they could understand whether the product that they were growing was going to be saleable or of interest to them. And the people that I deal with made it very clear to me that the product that they need from me is an A-grade product, and that nobody else is growing the genetics that I'm growing. So these are new genetics from their breeding program. They have their own customer base, whomever that might be, and for whatever purpose it might be. But smokable hemp, terpene extraction, they're extracting terpenes from much of the varieties they're growing now, and they're infusing them into drinks. And so now out of Colorado, there's a new product, and it's our breeder partner who is the one who is doing it, that is flavored cannabis derived terpenes in, basically in sparkling drinks. And they're also doing it in coffee. They have that might even be the biggest one, is the coffee. There's a unique coffee house in Colorado that packages their coffee for sale across the state in cans, cold coffee. And they're now infusing it with terpenes grown from these specific varieties. So genetics is really important. I think the first thing and most important thing is learn about hemp, learn about the market, learn about all the different places that you can sell it to and all the different uses there are. Maybe fiber is the way to go for you because of the equipment you have or the knowledge that you have in growing crops before, or maybe, you're an ornamental grower like me, and you're used to growing plants to fruition and flower, before you sell them, and find a direction, and then once you've found that direction, research what are the best genetics for people who want fiber, or for people who want CBD, or maybe there's a local extractor. You go to the extractor and say, what are the best varieties that you extract from? Which ones have the highest content? Who grows them? Where can I buy the seeds? And get connected that way, if that's what your purpose is. I was very lucky that through the program, one of the people who was donating genetics and plant material to MREC for testing was the same breeder grower that I met and made a deal with to grow his product. And it's interesting how it came about. We were just having a conversation about the pilot program, and I said to him, what's the one thing that you need to expand your product, to expand your retail products? Because he was packaging unique items. And he said, materials, space to grow, greenhouse space to grow. And I said, well, okay, that's something that I can talk about with you. And it also allowed us to, it gave us an incentive to learn how to do this weekly production. And although the weekly production didn't work out, and we learned why, number one is our plants were too juvenile, and to get the proper A grade flower, you have to have more of a base in the plant. So juvenility, which is very important in a lot of perennial plant material that go to retail, is not suitable for this annual flower. And so it has to be grown out till the stalk has a certain girth before you want to put it into flower. Otherwise, you'll end up with small flower. So we had to go with much larger pots, which changes our facilities. We're using benches, and maybe benches had to be lower. We've been making these adjustments to accommodate. We have 1/2 acre house that's a full blackout house. But we also learned along the way that with varying genetics, there are varying issues with blackout and the necessity for blackout. I'll give you a good example. We brought varieties in to our facility, and we put them in a propagation greenhouse where we propagate our clematis. And within 3 weeks, they started to go into flower, and it was like June. And so we had a discussion with the breeder, and I worked with Brian, and we discussed it all the way through, that we determined that it's not so cut and dry with black and white, but there is actually, we coined the term gray out, where you use the philosophy that it's cumulative light hours based on different levels of light intensity and different durations, like maybe 14 hours a day versus 12 hours a day, that a plant will go into flower if, in fact, even if you have 14 hours of daylight, if you shade that daylight, not black it out, but just cut the UV. And we actually were cutting it down to 40% natural sunlight, and the plants immediately started to go into flower. And there was nothing abnormal about the flower when it grew. So we haven't got this written down yet. There's a lot that has to be worked on, but there is a big difference with genetics. Some genetics, this breeder's genetics, are very early flowering plants. And with the slightest drop in light, they consider going into flower. There's a lot of other varieties that aren't like that, and you have to provide full-on blackout. But there's still plenty to learn and to be aware of, and to make sure that people know that, read the textbook, get the advice, but trial and error. And don't do big trials. Do little trials. Right. Don't do your whole 10 acres or 20 acre as a trial. Just do a portion of it, I think, and try and learn from that. I think a lot of people got scared away because they went in too hard, too fast, got burnt, and said, okay, it's not for me. I don't think that has been beneficial for the hemp industry at all. I think there's a lot of capable growers who just tried to go too big too soon. And without going through the steps. We were a little bit guilty of that ourselves. But luckily along the way, we realized it and changed gears. And now we're actually growing both in the greenhouse and indoors under LED lights. And of course, it's hemp. It's not high THC cannabis, which has a value much higher than the value of hemp flower. However, if you identify the right market and you have the right genetics and you can provide those genetics to that market, you can get value out of it. Wholesale prices go up substantially because you're selling to a hemp flower connoisseurs market, and it's it's an interesting market to think, but smokable hemp has become very big, and now everybody's claiming that the hemp they're growing and bringing out of the field is high quality smokable hemp. And what we're trying to do is to identify the difference between field grown smokable, greenhouse grown smokable, and indoor grown smokable, and they all have different values. And so identifying what product level, what grade level that you want to make is important. With us, it's a bit of a difficult thing because if our product's not A grade, then it's worthless, because we're growing a product that has to be A grade to have value. And if we don't get that A grade and we can't ship it to our customer, what do we do with it? We don't have an extraction market. We really can't anyways, because they're proprietary products. So, for us, we have to be very diligent about what we're doing to get that product. But just like anything, clematis, and I don't say this tongue in cheek, is the hardest perennial plant in the world to propagate. It's just, there's nothing harder to propagate, to put roots on this tiny little skinny vine stem. And that's why there's very few of us worldwide. I think there's only two companies in North America that actually propagate. One of them's in the west coast of Canada, and us. And we do 75 or 80% of what gets sold in the US. So, and other people don't try to get into that market because it's so difficult. And I'm hoping, for my own sake, that I've identified a niche that, based on our facilities and our abilities, we will be able to grow a product that other people just won't be able to grow. And I will be able to avoid the gluts in the market, which is another discussion, by having a consistent demand year-wide. And it won't be affected by the fall harvest. So right now, the hemp industry, it can't go on this way, because what happens is when harvest hits and all of these millions of pounds come in and get dried and become available, everybody's price crashes. And so I can't sell my product out of a greenhouse, because it's not indoor, it's greenhouse grown. I can't sell it out of the greenhouse because I need a certain dollar for it. And the product coming out of the fields, although very good, it won't be as high in content of many things that I have in greenhouse, but the market is flush with bud and with material, whether it be for extraction or smokable, for every purpose. And so they're happy with that because they're doing 100 acres. They're harvesting it differently than us. They're drying it differently than us. Their input costs per pound are much, much less. And so they're able to commoditize that crop. And so September, October, November, December, January, probably up until February, prices are very low on hemp, and everybody's got it because it's everywhere. Because they grow the field, harvest it in the fall, and it's as simple as that. So we realized that our greenhouse crop, anything that we harvested in September or later, we weren't going to be able to sell it. Just, we weren't going to be able to sell it and even break even on the costs. So we did that once, and we won't do it again. And I think that the massive growth of hemp is part to blame because the the extraction houses, the labs, all of that infrastructure has to grow much bigger to be able to consume all of that material coming in the fall. Nobody wants to store their product for 4 months before they get to ship it, but that's what's happening. And that's why there's 4, 5, 6 months worth of supply that keeps the prices down. Now, in the markets I'm looking at, they're not interested in comparing it to that product. This product is totally different. And even if it's for extraction, because it's a genetic, it's a proprietary genetic plant that seems to have high contents of these terpenes that they're looking for. And so being able to delve in really deep and finding the market for you, and it does require some research, will pay off in the end for sure. And I think the market is massive and it's not going anywhere. It's only going to get better. It's going to become more like the ornamental plant industry, where you have companies like mine getting involved in growing and bringing a big level of professionalism and investment in research to make it better. And once we do that, I think we'll, the industry right now for drying and storing and extracting can't get anywhere close to managing that massive influx in the fall. So we basically decided to stay out of that market. We will play a little bit like we're going to have plant material available come April, May, June, July, maybe even into August from the greenhouse. But at that point in time, we can sell it at the price that we need to make, because all the field grown stuff is gone. And the only people producing product are the ones who are in a greenhouse.
Okay.
So we've identified those areas and we're going to try and focus on those.
All right. That's a lot to unpack. Let's see if we can do that a little bit. Thanks. A lot of great insight in there. So one of the first things we were talking about was the cultivar approval program that kind of put you in partnership with IFAS. I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that it was a 12-week grow that was set by rule, FDAC's rule. And as you mentioned, the goal was to determine a THC content at that 12 weeks. The approval came along with the less than 0.3%. Now, Brian, one of the things I remember talking about, and maybe you'll share some insight here based on what David was saying, but you two of you spent a fair bit of effort ensuring that process was going to be consistent and well documented. So can you just describe briefly what went into the cultivar approval program and kind of how the science met the industry in the middle?
Certainly, Zach. Any kind of crop, particularly this unique crop, is responding to a given environment, whether that be temperature, photo period, irrigation, water stress. And I think what made our program unique in partnership with Roseville is that David had the facilities for an indoor grow operation where we could control those environmental variables very closely, day in, day out, 365 days a year. And so I think what was, again, so remarkable about this is that we could cultivate those plants entirely indoors. And with the data loggers and using the rooms and facilities that David provided IFAS to use, is that we could keep everything exactly the same, consistent. So from batch to batch, test to test, regardless of day, month, week, or year, we would have the exact same conditions. And so that it was a high level of consistency, extremely high level on their environmental aspects, so that we were removing any kind of environmental stimuli bias that may have existed during that evaluation period. And I think that was very unique. I'm not familiar or aware of any other evaluation program that used a facility such as that. And so that was probably one of the coolest and unique things that we were able to put together specifically for that program.
Yes. So David, you were mentioning kind of how that program kind of had you re-envision what grow operation might be like, given that sort of experimental control. But what it did do is it gave you a chance to see a bunch of genetics across this sort of controlled environment, so that it was genetics that you see as opposed to the differences environment. So you said you saw 33 varieties, 32 made it to approval at 12-week grow. Sounds like you picked one. Maybe if you can summarize for us the panel, if it was one out of the 32 that you actually liked, or if there were other good candidates, if there were certainly some that were like, okay, yeah, it passes, but I'm never going to grow this. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we did get to see all of that, and there was many nice varieties that, at least, aesthetically, they grew well, they produced a lot of flower. They were consistent, which is very nice. They had aroma that was very nice. So we saw a lot of different growth habits, tall ones with less branching, short, stocky ones that looked like they had been pruned twice as they were growing, but they hadn't been. And so we learned right away that you can get a lot of different type of hemp. And you have to know whether or not you're going to grow something that's going to go 5 or 6 feet tall in a pot, or whether it's going to stay at 3 feet tall. So that was very good general knowledge to learn. I think the big thing that we used it for is that with the controlled environment, it gave us a base to compare everything that we were doing outside.
Okay.
And so that was important, so that we could see where it is that we had to focus outside to get the same kind of results inside. And of course, that's pest management, is a big part of it. We were worried at first that there were going to be issues with fungus and mold. And, we've been told that once plants go into flower, that's when they really get susceptible, because they start weeping, their oils. And we found that we were able to control it very well with, certified product, that is available to any grower. Because, of course, everything that we do is basically organic other than the fertilizer. I mean, we follow all the same rules of an organic grower using product that they would use. And the only thing that really, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I think the only thing that really keeps us from being organic is our fertilizer. So we're not using animal waste somehow mixed together in a slurry to water our plants. No, we're using proper fertilizers, both granular, encapsulated, powder for liquid. And I don't believe any of those fertilizers fit in with an organic grow, but are necessary to provide cannabis grow, which has many needs to grow a good plant. All of those needs have to be met to have terpene content high, CBD content high. So I think that was probably the most important thing, was seeing the difference between indoor to outdoor, controlled environment to one that's not so controlled. We do have controls in our greenhouses. They are controlled environment greenhouses, but they're not 100% controlled environment. We have lights, we can vent, we can close walls, we can increase the breeze, decrease the breeze. We can modify temperature within our own range, because we're not heating or cooling. We're just using venting to change the temperature. And identifying those areas made it allowed us to develop a growing protocol that included sprays and maintenance sprays up until the point that you have nice flower that you don't want to damage with any spray. And getting to that point clean is a very important aspect of growing in a greenhouse or outside, is maintaining pest control and pest levels to a minimal, a harmonious level. Some pests can live in there and not bother your crop at all, and you don't have to go in and spray and get rid of every one. So you can have a tolerable level of, say, aphids here and there. Almost impossible to completely eliminate, but you can easily control them. We don't have that problem indoor, of course. We don't have any of those issues indoor.
Okay.
All we have to do is fertilize.
I hope it stays that
on.
way.
We turn the lights off. We fertilize. We let the plant grow. It's the least expensive way of labor-wise to grow a plant is inside, because you don't touch it once you put it in. You just feed it and water it. And so I think we learned that we could utilize those facilities to grow a very high-quality product for our customer. And we're only just starting now to have finished product that is ready to go to market. And at the same time, we are improving our greenhouse grown product. And we learned that through also the program with the university, where varieties that were grown longer and started differently, like a commercial grower would do, as opposed to a research test, you can get much better volume, from a plant with age as opposed to youth. And genetics are genetics, so THC content doesn't change.
Right. And I think that's an important point to make, that the 12-week grow for cultivar approval is more likely than not different than how you would grow it commercially. And so I maybe your commercial grow is 16 weeks. But of course, you still have to be able to be in compliance with the 0.3% THC when you go up for your harvest approval.
Yeah, and let's explain that. We test 30 days before harvest to meet the regulations.
That's exactly
So
right.
you have to test at below 0.3. So it's actually a 12-week program for the university, but if you were to finish those plants, which we didn't, if you were to finish them, you'd need another 4 weeks. So it would be a 16-week grow, to a finished plant. The university only needed 12 weeks to conclude, because that's when every other grower is going to test their plants. So we tested at that same moment in time. Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple times. I'm sorry, Brian, did you have anything to add to that?
No. And again, I think what David added was really unique in that, there is that difference. There is the difference between obviously the research objectives and commercial production objectives. And that was, again, great insight into how those two differ specifically.
Cool. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your market goal. So you said you developed a relationship with a breeder. You've kind of chosen your variety there based on that relationship, and then you got to meet A grade. So can you kind of describe a little bit of what that goal is? Kind of what does it mean to get an A, and are you doing the scoring, or are they doing it? How does how does this work out?
Sure. Well, I educated myself, with my partner as to the value of product coming from indoor, greenhouse, outdoor, so that I could measure, we're always measuring our dollar per square foot in a greenhouse over the course of a year. And so we came up with the correct conclusion in our greenhouses based on the amount of pounds that we should produce. And maybe I'm getting off track from your question, but we try to identify, like, if you only get 250 pounds and you based your number on 350 pounds at a certain price, and you can't get that 350 pounds, that's one of the things that we learned about juvenility and why we needed bigger plants. And I'm sorry, what was the original question? Because I know I got off track.
Yeah, you mentioned A grade. So I was hoping to learn a little bit about what that meant for you.
Right. Well, A grade requires, basically three things. It requires aesthetics, meaning it has to be a really nice looking bud that's trimmed nicely. So if you were to go into a medical cannabis dispensary and buy their highest grade fresh bud, that's A grade. And so it's properly trimmed, it's firm, and when you open it up, it has great aroma. So it has both eye appeal and nose appeal. And along with it needs to be the test report that says that not only has it met the THC threshold, but it also has passed a full spectrum test where it tests for everything so that you're proving there are no insecticides, no metals, nothing that shouldn't be there. So with every one of our crops, like we'll do multiple tests for THC, but we will always finish with a full spectrum test. So at the very end, when we're harvesting, right before harvest, we get a full spectrum test so that we can assure anybody who's getting the material that it's been grown properly, it doesn't have any contaminants. And that's pretty standard industry wide. I mean, full spectrum tests have to be done in medical cannabis, I believe, to be able to sell the product. The hemp rules aren't so specific, but we do it anyways. It has to have, well, I think that's basically it. A grade, it's a subjective thing because we're learning it, if I grow a variety and the buds are small and they're all nice and they're nicely trimmed, but they're small, it's not A grade. A grade that has to have a certain size to it. And so that's an important thing. That's if you grow it properly and you feed it enough, you get the A grade product. But you can't have an issue anywhere down the line during the 8 weeks of flowering, because any issue that you have during the 8 weeks of flowering, you can't make up for on the end. So if, for instance, and this has happened before, I had a fellow go in and spray. It wasn't really necessary to spray, and the buds were filled with beautiful white tips, and they were flowering, which means they were growing, increasing all of their content. And 24 hours after he went in and sprayed, and it was a maintenance spray, it wasn't even necessary, all of the flower tips were brown. And most of them were like that for 8 or 9 or 10 days before they started to grow again. And you don't make up those 8 or 9 or 10 days. The plant's going to finish in 56 days, whether you like it or not. Growing it for an extra week, generally is not advised, because generally the plant is done, it's ready to be harvested, and you're only exposing yourself to more issues by leaving it out as opposed to drying it. So anything that happens and you lose time, you basically are not going to end up with A grade, or you will end up with much less percentage of your total crop as A grade.
Right. And in your instance, you're saying your goal is A, and you don't have an A minus distribution center. So that's is it acceptable or is it not? And so my client, who is the only one I sell to, he has a vast network of customers. Right.
And some customers demand a certain product and others demand another. And sometimes we can make a deal on the dollar value per pound of a certain product. I say, it's either A or it's garbage to my staff, because that's what we're growing is A grade, right? But there is an outlet for the trim that comes out of our trim machine, for extraction, because the terpene extraction is very important to our client. So there is a use for everything. But if you're spending a lot of money to grow A grade, selling it as for extraction, isn't paying the bills, and you're not going to do it for very long before you're out of business, right? Right. When you're growing indoors, the electricity, the air conditioning, all of those things cost the same whether you get $100 a pound or $500 a pound. So, the only way to really to be fruitful is to not make any errors during that 4-week period. And it can be a tall task, but it's doable. People do it. Other greenhouses do it. We've proven that we can do it. So bumping it up on scale now is what we're working on. Right. We can make the product.
And I think that's where you get into the different systems. And so I'm always thinking about cultivation systems. And with hemp, there's this continuum where you have the lowest cost per square foot would be your outdoor field production, but you conversely also have the least level of control. You can't control when it rains, how much it rains. You can't control photo period, obviously, very easily. And then as we ratchet up closer towards control, we go to an open-sided greenhouse where now we have more levels of control. We can exclude rain. We can control levels of irrigation. You may have limited control on temperature within a range, either cooling pads or venting. But ultimately, you can't drop the temperature in mid-July or August to a chilly 68 degrees if you wish to, very easily. But your production costs then go up, but your consistency goes up. And then ultimately, as David was articulating, going into a full indoor environment, well, now we have the ultimate level of control. Now we control everything, but price goes up, but so does consistency. And I think what's unique in this conversation about David talking about his experience is that he's operating in that range of those higher levels of control for higher consistency in the niche in which he and his business operates. And to achieve that A grade is using facilities that are designed for that purpose. And I think that's where Roseville Farms' experience with clematis, and David, you may want to talk about that. Clematis is not an easy crop to grow in Florida, based on what it wants from an environmental control standpoint and what it wants in terms of its stimuli to get out of its life cycle, which you're looking for. And so I think that previous experience working with the crop under controlled environments, I think gave you a unique perspective, almost a leg up, really, in understanding this plant and integrating it into a controlled system.
Yeah. 68 degrees is kind of chilly in Florida, isn't it?
Come July and August, I wish my field was like that.
All right, I'm going to go on to the last question for you, fellas. Thank you so much for the conversation today. I just want to end with what you're most excited about in terms of hemp. Brian, I'm going to give you the first chance this time, and then we'll end with your answer, David.
Certainly. Thanks, Zach. I'm excited to see a new crop come into the state. I'm excited to see our industry get excited about a new crop in the state. We lived through some dark times in the ornamental industry and the foliage industry in the late 2000s. A lot of folks were losing a lot of money, and it was hard to make profit on a per plant basis. So I love the fact that we're able to grow something unique, something different. Early on in the conversation about hemp based on our photo period, there was a lot of criticism saying that our day length was far too short to really be productive or competitive. And I'm really proud of our industry that's managing to find their niche, to find a way and to compete nationally, and to do it using good science and producing a good product and bringing professionalism to an industry, and really raising the bar.
All right. I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, ditto, all of those things. I think, in the beginning, Brian and I looked at hemp, because we've been looking for replacement crops for the state of Florida for a long time. It started with, I guess the big one for us was blueberries. And, the University of Florida did a lot of work with blueberries, and I even got into it and grew 24 varieties of blueberries for a national distribution to Costco. And we hoped that blueberries would consume a lot of the acreage in Florida that we were losing from citrus. Because when you lose citrus, if you don't replace it with an ag crop, it turns into housing and it reduces ag space. And with the amount of lost acreage, quick example, Lake County, 1981, largest citrus producer in the state of Florida was Lake County. And now Lake County, freezes. It's been freezing since 1981, 82, 83. And so now it's one of the smallest producers. But that amount wasn't picked up down south. And now we have citrus screening. We hoped that hemp was going to be successful as a field crop so that we could replace hundreds, if not thousands of acres of citrus that is being lost into an agricultural crop and keep it ag. And it was one of those crops that we believe, if done properly, can be profitable. It's just an industry that has to start, and it's a grind to get it going. But I believe, and we believed in the beginning, and that's why it was so exciting in the beginning, was finding a replacement crop so that the industry could survive. I'm second generation nursery. My children are third generation nursery. So we're looking to the future of the ag industry and wanting to keep it strong. For me now, after I've gone through all of this, the most exciting part is identifying a new market for our product, even though our product is still a flower. We grow flowers and our market buys those flowers. And so we're able to do the same thing that we've been doing forever, which is growing plants and growing difficult plants to grow at a high level. Except now we have a completely different market to sell to, because the ornamental plant market is not the greatest, easiest market to be in now. There's been a tremendous amount of consolidation, and the way companies are being profitable now is they've saved so much administratively by consolidating so many nurseries. And so now you have these nurseries that actually are probably handling 10, 15, 20% of the total consumption of plant material in the country. And that's huge distribution. And finding another market with different demands that allow us to be profitable, where the ornamental plant industry is getting tougher to be profitable. That was the most exciting thing, is realizing we can grow plants and that aren't vegetables that people are going to consume and eat, because that's another story. But we can grow plants and make money off it and be introduced to a whole new market of people and a whole new industry. And that's very exciting, after lifetimes in the ornamental plant industry, to be able to go and speak with people and sell to people in an unrelated market while still just being nurserymen growing plants.
Yeah,
that's
David.
for us
Yeah.
the most exciting thing.
Well, it's exciting for me to hear about your success. So it's been fun watching the two of you get to work over the last couple of years, and thankful for the conversation. Parting thoughts, any last things you'd like to say to our listeners?
If you're interested in hemp, tread carefully, but move forward, and don't be scared of it, because it's a very big industry. There's lots of room for everybody who wants to get in, and just understand what your niche is going to be, where you want to focus, and then focus on that, and you should be successful.
From my perspective, I'm thankful for the industry being interested in supporting our efforts, for the state for supporting our efforts when trying to identify and understand and come up with cultivation best practices for new crops. There is a lot of work with a lot of different people that are all coming together. And so without the support of a diverse group of individuals, I wouldn't have the tools to help our state, our growers, and to help lift the big heavy lift of understanding this unique, new, exciting crop for our state.
All right. Well, thank you, fellas. I am here with David Raab from Roseville Farms and Dr. Brian Pearson from the Mid-Florida Research and Education Center at a UF-IFAS. Thanks so much for the time and the conversation.
Thanks for having us, Zach.
Thanks, Zach.